Hi, everyone. Welcome to Reading the Agritourism Operation, Tools for Whole Farm Planning and Risk Management. Our presenter for the session is Dee from West Virginia University Extension. She's going to be speaking for about 50 minutes, 50, and then we'll have time for Q&A. If you're in the room today physically, please use the microphone in the center of the room. And if you're online, type your question in, and we have a facilitator who will read those questions as well. Thank you for being here.
All right, welcome everyone. How's everybody doing? Good. Okay, getting ready to talk about a little bit of risk management, right? Which is, we had some people pump us up this morning about all the opportunities and great things happening. And here I am putting a little damper on the enthusiasm, talking about risk management, right? So again, Dee Singh, I'm from West Virginia University's Extension Service. I wear two hats in keeping with what we were talking about this morning. So I am associate professor, so I do teach, and that means I do a little bit of research as well. And then my other hat is as ag service provider, working with agritourism operators as one of my sets of clients. So today we'll talk a little bit about risk management and talk about a tool that we use in some of our programs that really helps look at the big picture when it comes to risk management. So we've heard about, the genesis of agritourism and how it is a wonderful farm diversification strategies, right? Especially when farms are challenged with traditional agriculture and market challenges and so on. And so obviously agritourism represents a wonderful opportunity to diversify the farm, to overcome some of those challenges, represents a great way for income generation and cash flow generation and so on. But we all know that if we think of agritourism as an additional enterprise on the farm, we know that farming itself comes with all of this myriad of challenges, right? And adding an additional enterprise to the farming operation adds additional unique challenges. When we talk about agritourism as an additional, as an addition to the farm, we're talking about unique challenges. So my goal is to really look at the grassroots up, looking at the individual farms and agritourism operations, and how do we make them successful so that we can grow the agritourism industry, right? How do we grow an agritourism industry? One successful agritourism operation at a time, okay? And we don't want an agritourism industry where we have quite a large turnover of agritourism operators because they're not sustainable, they're not profitable, right? So it's all about how do we help these operators recognize the challenges going into agritourism. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay, there we go. So we know that there is no universal definition for agritourism across countries, certainly across states in the US. But the definition of agritourism itself lends itself to a lot of challenges, right? So, for example, in West Virginia, we define agritourism very broadly as anything lawful that happens on the farm, right? So think about the permitting, the zoning issues that comes along with that. And especially post-COVID, we've got a lot of community conflict issues, right? Everybody's not in my backyard, don't want you guys here. So there's a lot of challenges that comes about just because of your definition, right? So it's important to understand what your definition is and what defines an agritourism operation. And in West Virginia, one of the things that we really focus on, like you do here in Vermont and maybe in your countries around the world, is really hone in on that interpretation, and that education piece, right? Because this is the thing that resonates with all our visitors, whatever age, whatever ethnicities, and so on. It is that very, very effective and promising form of experiential learning, which agritourism is based around, right? And we all talk about agritourism really as that opportunity to connect people back to agriculture, back to the role of agriculture in society, connecting to where our food comes from and so on. And you cannot do that without the educational piece. And so here is the thing, regardless of how you define agritourism, how you link that tourism back to the farm is through the educational piece, through connecting the tourism back to agriculture. So that farm-based education is really a fundamental piece of agritourism. Another thing that really makes it challenging and raises a series of risk issues is, what is the role of agritourism on your farm? So again, we're thinking of agritourism as a farm diversification strategy here, right? And it's really important to understand, for the purposes of assigning resources to your agritourism operation, that you have to recognize, what is the role of agritourism on your farm? Is it a supplemental part of your farm? Is it a small part of your farm? So you might have a livestock operation and your agritourism is just to do some farm tours to educate people, to grow your customer base so that they support the livestock operation itself, right? In that case, if it is a minor activity, then guess what? It should take up and occupy minor resources, financial resources as well as time, right? If it is a complementary enterprise, then it should be on equal footing. So you might have a commercial orchard, for example. You're wholesaling your peaches and apples, let's say, and then you have a farm stand, farmer's market, some you pick, that kind of thing. Agritourism is on equal footing, so it has equal rights to the resources. Or it might be the primary enterprise, right? In which case the agritourism operation will monopolize the resources. But here's the thing, sometimes it's a minor part of your operation, yet it occupies your most time, right? And some of the research has shown that with agritourism operation, it tends to cannibalize the farm. It tends to take over because it's its own beast. It's very time consuming. And if you don't put agritourism in its place, if you don't understand this is where it belongs, then it can take over the farming operation, right? Which you don't want it to. So that's why I put it up here, because depending on which of these, agritourism represents on your farm, it brings with it its own set of challenges. So I think over the course of these 3 days, you will hear all about the opportunities, right? What are the opportunities? And so I'm an ag economist by training, so I am, I'm obligated to use the word demand and supply at least once in my presentation. So here we go. On the demand side, right? So what is the motivation? Why do people visit, right? Obviously, we've talked about that a lot today, that need for experiential travel, right? Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, okay. So that need for experiential travel, they're looking for that authenticity, right? They're looking for that hands-on activity. They're looking for unique experiences. They're looking for supporting that good food movement and slow food movement. I'm not sure if people outside of the US understand those terms. So instead of fast food, McDonald's, Burger King, Subway, we're talking about slow food that's created with love and coming off the farm and so on, right? And it's about really looking for those authentic experiences. That's really that paradigm shift that we see in the tourism industry towards a more sustainable form of tourism, right? Where you get in there, the term live like a local experience, I think the World Food and Drink Tourism Organization defines it so well. When they talk about food and drink tourism, they talk about traveling for a taste of place in order to get a sense of place. And doesn't that really explain what agritourism is, right? It's about getting that sense of place. You come to Vermont, you experience agritourism. It's so much different than if you go, let's say, to South Africa or you go to West Virginia, right? So it's about that, getting that sense of place. And then on the supply side, which is what I will focus on, what are the limitations? We have a lot of these farms. So you have farms that are large farms with the financial resources to weather any storm. And then you have these smaller farms that are challenged by financial resources, time, space. They're in rural populations. They are challenged by, that business management skill set, right? I hear farmers all the time telling me, I grow really good crops and I love my animals. People, not so much, okay? But if you're building an agritourism operation, you have to move from that production-oriented skill set, not necessarily move from it, but add to it. You've got to develop that customer and hospitality focused skill set, right? So a lot of times our agritourism operators are challenged by that, right? And so there are a lot of things, a lot of issues with respect to the farm itself, right? It's, how many days are you open? Where are you located? And so on, right? A lot of different motivations. We were on a field tour on Sunday, and we met different farms that farm for different motivations, right? Different reasons. Some are driven by profitability. Why? Because profits is what keep me open. Some is like, I don't care about the profit, goodwill and education and social interaction and building community goodwill is what they're focused on, right? So what is that motivation? So a lot of these represent the challenges. Oops, sorry. Oh, that was kind of anticlimactic. I wanted to kind of bring that in like, okay. But yeah, so a lot of challenges. So here is, does this resonate with anybody, right? So we talk about that romantic notion. I have a lot of students that don't even belong in our College of Agriculture, and they're like, oh my God, I want to buy a farm in West Virginia, and I want to do all of this farming. And I'm like, talk to a farmer, right? Because it's not all romance and idyllic surroundings, and the cows don't always come home, and they get out in the middle of the night, and the car hit them, and who's liable and stuff like that, right? And things break, and you've got a weather event that takes out all of your crops and things like that. So this is this is what we don't usually see. So this could be farming, this could be agritourism, this could be small business, right? These are the days that really, when you're running a business, a lot of the days look like that, right? So my thing is, how do we get people to, well, you're gonna have those days, but how do we make it less gloomy, right? So you don't really hold your head. And I don't wanna bring doom and gloom into it, but especially here in the US, there's a lot of issues. And it's something that is now beginning to be talked about more intentionally, is the issue of farm stress and mental health and suicide rates and so on. And that is typically it, right? We start off with a romantic notion, and then we end up with not so much romance, right? So one of the things we do in West Virginia and in the programs that I work with, I've been fortunate enough to be part of some national programs, international programs as well, is to really incorporate business planning and risk management into a business model for agritourism and agriculture, right? And we talk about it as, that's why I don't play video games. I don't know which button to press, right? My son is like, play with me. I'm like, I know, there's too many buttons for me. Okay, right? So, but when we talk about agritourism, we're talking about that planning process and helping people understand what are the risks, what are the challenges that you face, and how do you work to mitigate those risks, okay? So, let's talk about risk for a minute, and then we will go on. So what is risk, right? And so if you were my class, I'll ask you that, but in the interest of time, I'll just answer my own question, right? So risk is when something is uncertain, right? When the outcome is uncertain. And a lot of times we tend to think of risk as the bad things that can happen. But risk isn't always bad, because risk is what makes it possible to make a profit, right? If things wasn't risky, we'll put all of our money into a farm and then we'll just reap rewards, right? If there wasn't any risk. But that's what people do. They invest in a farm or another business with the hope of coming out on top, making some profits, right? So that's a risk. So there's a positive side to risk, but there's also the negative side to risk when things don't go the way you anticipate, right? So a lot of times in business, right, agriculture, agritourism included, we look at that risk, right? The tip of the iceberg or the tip of the fin, the perceived risks, right? The things that we think about. But then maybe our actual risk is actually like this, right? It's all the things that lurk under the surface that we aren't really paying attention to, or putting our heads in the sand, kind of, and not right. Let's not think about that, right? So one of those tours that we did, they were making food products, right? And I wouldn't say the name of the food product simply just for confidentiality. But with a food product, one of the big things you have to make sure that you have in place is a food safety plan, right? A recall plan, a traceability plan. And it was quite alarming to know that, like, no, we haven't done that yet. And I think it's one of the things to put the horse in front of the cart by making sure that you have considered the food safety aspect of your business if you have a food business, right? So as I said, one of the things that we want to be able to do is to help people, look at their risk and manage. So you either avoid it, or you reduce the impact, or you transfer it over to someone else through insurance, right? You pay for that. So yeah. So that's what risk is. And so with respect to agritourism, we're always encouraging people, yes, we want you to diversify. We want you to, to scale up. We want you to expand your business. But we also want you to do it in a very deliberate, a very intentional, a very, think before you leap, a very educated way, right? Understand when you are expanding, what are the additional risks and challenges you're taking on. So for example, obviously, when I'm doing something new, like with agritourism, there are so many new skill sets that I need to develop, right? So, and then that takes a little while, right? There's a learning curve attached to it. Our agritourism operators in the room will attest. Sometimes you have a short learning curve. Sometimes it's like forever and a day to get to where you want to be, right? But there's a whole lot of other things that comes with it. Is it financially feasible? Can I make money doing this? Can I make sufficient money? And then there's a big difference between economic feasibility and market feasibility, right? Market feasibility, is there enough customers that will come and participate in my business so I can make enough money? And am I communicating with them and all of those things? And not to mention the rules and the regulations and the licenses, depending on what type of agritourism. Let's talk craft industry. You have a winery, distillery, mead, hard cider. Lots of rules and regulations depending on the state, right? West Virginia, oh, it is terrible. Our bordering state, Virginia, wonderfully open, very supportive. So it all depends on which state you're in. So a lot of issues with respect to, the feasibility and the viability of new enterprises that you need to know before you begin, right? Okay. So I'm an ag service provider. We're talking to a group of other ag service provider, people that work with agritourism operators and farmers, or I'm talking to agritourism operators themselves, and I'm saying, okay, we have to do this business planning and this risk management. And generally in the, in the theoretical world, there are different ways that you can approach that, different perspectives, right? So one perspective that people talk about is this whole issue of sustainability, right? And then another school of thought is that, well, no, yeah, sustainability is okay, but you really have to think about that systems approach, right? And then somebody, you talk to another ag service provider and they'll be like, oh, the systems approach, yeah, but you really have to focus in on looking at the customer and the way the customer sees your business, right? And then another group of people would say, yeah, the customer, but we really have to look at all of the risks, that risk management approach. And I'm like, oh my God. And I'm the agritourism operator. And I'm like, well, how do you really want me to plan my business and manage my risk, right? So which approach is best? Well, what do I focus on? So let's take a look at these and then we'll come back to which one do we focus on, right? So I'll just talk very, very quickly about these perspectives because they're all really, really important, right? So when we talk about the sustainability approach to business planning and to business planning, we talk about that whole farm. And when we talk about sustainability, we talk about generally the 3 pillars of sustainability, right? People, profit, planet. So 1, we want to build profitable businesses. 2, we want to make sure that that we are paying attention to the operators and the customers and the employees. And 3 is we want to do that in a very environmentally sound way, right? And so when we talk about sustainable operations, we talk about it from a goal-oriented approach. You're setting goals for these 3 buckets, so to speak. And in terms of the goal setting, we're thinking about, okay, where do I want to go, right? So I'm talking business planning. Where do I want to go with my business, right? What is my end goal? So I'm really beginning with the end in mind. And then you think about, okay, so I know where I want to end up. Where am I starting from? And what resources do I have? Okay? And what resources do I have access to? Right? Can I get a loan? Or do I need my husband to go with me to get the loan, right? That kind of thing. And then you think about, okay, I know where I want to be. I know what resources I have, and I know where I'm starting from. So which is the best route to get there? Okay, so how can I get there? And then how do I track my progress, right? How do I make sure that I'm on the way to my goals from a sustainability perspective, right? So that's one school of thought, that whole sustainability issue. Then we can look at business planning from a holistic or systems approach. So this is a slightly different approach. It builds on sustainability, but it really looks at the farm and the agritourism operation as a system that's not comprised of distinct parts like a people, profit, planet, but it's a system that is made up of interrelated parts, right? And those interrelated parts are, the biological, so all of your crops, your soil, your water, your livestock, your business management skills, your environmental resources, right? And then the social resources, okay? So you're looking at it as a system, and the thing with that system is when something changes in one part, it affects the whole farm. So let's talk about that romantic notion and the girl that was crying here, right? So let's talk about that farm stress and mental health. And if that is an issue, right, how does it affect the whole farm? Well, you don't have the energy, the wherewithal, the motivation to do anything else on the farm, right? So that is, or if you have very poor soil quality, right, it affects everything else. So those are the kind, that is the systems approach, right? So that's another approach. So do we want to do business planning along the systems approach? Another way to look at business planning would be the way customers see our business, right? You know how they say the customer is always right. So in order to sell Jane Smith what Jane Smith wants to buy, you've got to see your destination through Jane Smith's eyes. Isn't that true? Yeah? right? Because, well, Jane Smith has to buy it. If she's not convinced, guess what, right? And so, sometimes, so when we approach, or if we use this approach, the customer's perspective, sometimes our views are skewed by, our farm is familiar, we don't see the issues. There's different perspectives and different expectations. We were talking about this morning, people coming that understand farms and what farms are composed of when they're coming to do agritourism. And then we have city folks that come out and that they're like, oh, this is not Old McDonald's farm. They actually have flies and smells and things like that on the agritourism operation, right? And so when we think about the customer's perspective, we have to think about, that perspective even before the customer gets to your farm. There's this new whole thing about e-hospitality, right? What they see before they get to your farm. And sometimes they don't even make it to your farm based on what they see. You didn't draw them to the farm. Remember, agritourism, and we like to think that, oh, everybody wants to come to an agritourism operation. But remember, there's a lot of other competing interests for the consumer dollar, for the tourist dollar, right? So I see my friend from the Dominican Republic is here. So they can go to the Dominican Republic or they can come to Vermont or West Virginia, right? Yeah, so there's a lot of competing things. How do you draw them to the farm? And that happens long before they get to your farm, right? I promise I'm gonna get to risk management. I know I'm taking a long road to get there, but I will get there, okay? So anyway, when we think about business planning, do we want to do it from the perspective of the agritourism, from the visitor? Okay, so I say all of this, and it would be very, remiss of me not to throw this slide up that says, okay, listen, Linda, we know what your expectations are, but there are some inherent risks in agritourism that we just can't wish away, right? We can't avoid them, they're there. That's why some states have this agritourism liability statute that really tends to moderate people's expectations, right? So yeah, so it's really important. That's an important part of looking at the customer's perspective. But is this the way you want your agritourism operators to approach business planning from the customer's perspective? It's important, but is it the most important thing? Is it more important than the systems approach? Or is it more important than the sustainability approach, right? Which is more important, right? And then yet again, there's this last approach. Oh, okay. So when we're thinking of the customer perspective, I throw this up there just for completeness, so you can, yeah, you see that? Expectation, reality. Isn't that the truth? So a lot of the city folks, no, seriously, a lot of the city folks, they look at agritourism and they think it's all wonderful winery and winding gravel paths that are safe. And some farms are like that, Old McDonald farms, and some are not. And it's about managing expectations, right? But anyway, there's a lot to uncover in this slide, and I throw it up there because I know this is on Hoover. And in case you need some sleeping materials tonight or tomorrow, just pull the slide out and you'll be fine, right? Fall asleep in no time. But anyway, you can go through that and it kind of gives you the complete picture. But this is the last approach. When you talk about business planning, should we approach it from a risk management approach? And I hope that, you guys don't miss the forest for the tree. I have my tree here with the roots. So if we want to grow agritourism operations that are rooted in sustainability, right, in profitability and environmental stewardship and building these community connections, then, one approach would be to make sure that they're understanding that risk management, right? What are the risks? What are the things, if I do it correctly, it's going to bring me rewards? And what are the things, if I do incorrectly, it's going to probably derail my business, right? And when we think about risk management for the purposes of our training, and here is our QR code for our West Virginia Agritourism Initiative. I should put a plug in for that. That is partnership between WVU Extension Service and the West Virginia Department of Agriculture. We have a representative from the Department of Agriculture. Beth, raise your hand. There she is, right? And so that QR code takes you here. But anyway, so when we talk about risk management as it relates to business planning, we tend to, there's a lot to uncover in risk management, right? So we tend to put them in 6 different buckets, so it's easier to deal with them, right? So what are the production and management risks? So what are the things I have to do? Because if agritourism relies on the farm, there are certain production and management things like, when do I plant my sunflowers so that it's available at a particular time? Or when do I have the goats kidding or my sheep lambing so that it's there for that season that I want my petting zoo open, those kinds of things. So I have with my U-pick, I want to have a strawberry U-pick, when do I plant, and so on, right? So a lot of production and management considerations, of course, the financial risks, right? So I told you I'm an ag economist, so that is near and dear to my heart. If we're not making money from it, why are we doing it, right? So there's the goodwill thing, but at the end of the day, you gotta keep the people safe. You know how you do that? You improve your operation. You know what you need to improve your operation? Moolah, right? Money. Okay. So then what are the marketing risks? There's a lot of marketing issues, right? Marketing has to do with drawing customers to your farm. If you don't have customers, who's going to participate? So I always say, if I don't have customers, it's like, so I always say, if you don't market, you don't communicate, it's like winking at a girl in the dark. You know what you're doing, the girl doesn't, right? What's the point? There's no point, right? So come on, we gotta communicate, right? So there's that whole marketing risk. There's the whole legal risk, right? You talk about that. That's the first thing people think about when they think about agritourism. Do I want to risk my $1 million farm to make $20,000 from my agritourism operation in a year, right? So yeah, because one person sues you because they broke their arm or their leg or something, and that's the end of your farm, right? So you have to think about all of the legal liability issues and then all of the environmental liability issues, right? What are the permits and laws and regulations and so on. And then the whole human resources risk, right? Whether that's from the operator, employees, or customers and that kind of thing. So a lot to unpack. So is this the approach you want people to think about when we're thinking about, or when you're advising them about business planning? Which approach is best? Okay, well, with the West Virginia Agritourism Initiative, what we have found is that all of those approaches make sense. So is there a way that we can combine and integrate and develop some kind of a comprehensive tool to help people to incorporate that sustainability view, that systems view, that customer's perspective, and that risk management perspective into one decision-making tool, right? So that it's a comprehensive, it's an integrated way to be able to do that, right? Oh, do you guys like my pig roast? This was actually taken in Copenhagen, Denmark this summer. So yeah, a lot of agritourism going on in there as well. So anyway, here is what I call this integrated tool. And I should have said this when I talked about the holistic or the systems approach, and I talk about it as the reading the farm. And so I call this tool reading the agritourism operation. And why we call it reading the farm or reading the agritourism operation. So there is this group called SARE, Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education, that came up with this concept of reading the farm with the perspective that, well, there's a systems approach to managing your farm. And when you really look into the farm and you look into your records, you really uncover the story of your operation or your business. So in a sense, you are reading the story of the farm. And so that's kind of what the name is, because when we really take a deeper dive into all of these issues surrounding our farm, all of these challenges, you're really reading the story, and it's telling you, okay, here's your current story. It kind of has some dark days and so on, but here's what you need to do to improve it so that you end up with a story that's really nice and cheerful at the end and profitable, right? So yeah, so that's what we're about. So developing this holistic tool is based on that concept. So complete this sentence for me. When you've seen one farm, you've seen them all. That's what we like to think, right? But that's wrong. Because when you've seen one farm, you've seen one farm, simply because all farms have a unique set of resources, capabilities, challenges, and risks. And so usually as an ag service provider, when we talk about business planning, risk management, and so on, we usually tell people there's a one size fits all. Here's what to do, right? But that's not true. So is there a way to develop a tool that will help agritourism operators and the people who advise them to come up with a unique tool, a unique set of resources to help these individual operators? So I've copyrighted this term, so don't you use that, but you know, using this tool, it allows you to uncover what are the unique challenges for your business. So instead of fine-tuning your business management decision, you're now fine-tuning them, right? Get that? Okay, yeah. So, and that's kind of the purpose of this, right? So what we have done with this is really, you know, develop that comprehensive tool that really helps to, you know, to sort of promote some of the positive benefits of risk-taking while mitigating the not so good ones, the negative ones, right? And really it helps you. So we're really doing it from that whole farm perspective, sustainability perspective, customer focus, but also from a risk management perspective. And it really helps people take the right risk, mitigate the bad, and continue to profit. Because like I said before, we really want people to hone in on that business planning so that they have successful business agritourism operations. Because the only thing that's going to grow your agritourism industry is to have successful individual operations, okay? It relates to what we call that food court concept, right? The reason Vermont is so popular for agritourism is, you know why? There's a lot to see and do with respect to agritourism in Vermont. So when I think about where will I get the most value for my dollar, I will come to some place like Vermont or the Willamette Valley in Oregon, because there's a lot of agritourism happening. So it pulls people like a magnet to your area, okay? Lindsay, how are we doing for time? 13 minutes, oh my God. Okay, let's go. All right, so as I said, this tool is meant to integrate all of these things, and I kind of told you about all of this before, so I will just continue. So here's my whole farm risk management tool, and here is us, hard day at the office for DC, doing a risk assessment for Josh Bennett at Hopknot Cidery. It's like I have these really hard day at the office, right? But anyway, so here's the risk management tool. It really is about identifying your risks, okay? So here's how you, so remember I said we're going to incorporate risk management from a holistic and sustainable and customer perspective as well. So this tool allows you to figure out what is my, you know, for different factors, what is my degree of risk? And the degree of risk has to do with, so think of a hurricane, right? So how bad is this hurricane going to be, right? Or hurricane season, how bad is hurricane season going to be? Well, it depends on what's the frequency of the hurricane. Am I getting one every week? Or am I just going to get one for the season, right? And then two, it depends on what's the magnitude, right? Category 5, right? That's a bad hurricane, right? So what is the potential risk impact? So when you think about each of these issues, you want to think about what is the degree of risk and how prepared am I, the agritourism operator, to manage that risk. There could be a risk with a really high degree of risk. It poses a big problem to my farm, but I'm well prepared to handle it. Food safety, for example. I know that's a big issue if I have a food product I'm producing, but I have my traceability plan, I have my HACCP plan, I've engaged in GAP training and FSMA training. I got my stuff covered, right? So yeah, and anyway, so continuing, so we look at and we assign values to the degree of risk and the preparedness, and it shows up on this matrix. And then based on that matrix, I'm able to see which are the priority risks, and then I'm able to come up with some risk management strategies. So let me show you what that looks like. So here's the tool. It's an Excel tool. So it's available on the West Virginia Agritourism Initiative. What I uncovered really late, and I apologize, is that Hoover does not take Excel files, only PDF. So we got to figure that out, okay? So it will be posted either through a link on Hoover or something later on. But let me work on that, okay? But anyway, so here's the tool, and we will have, oops, sorry, different factors listed under here, right? And again, while we're taking that risk management approach, it does integrate the customer perspective, the sustainability, the holistic perspective. So we're going to assign a value between 1 to 5 for how frequent we think the risk is. We're going to assign a value between 1 to 5 for the magnitude, so that this Excel sheet will calculate the degree of risk. And we're going to assign a value for the preparedness. So who's going to assign this value? The agritourism operator. Why? Because that is the person who's most intimate and knows how prepared they are, or knows, you know, what's the degree of risk to my farm. And sometimes as an ag service provider, you think that you know what is, you know, what should be a risk that this operator should be managing. But that is important too, but the operator's perspective, what keeps them up at night? What are their major heartburn issues, right? That's the thing that we want them to really, you know, intentionally discover in this process as well. And so we're going to come up with these values. Of course, there are other things, you know, what is your current goal? What's the current method? Do you want to do nothing and just continue as you are? Or do you want new strategies? And the tool has some of those strategies built out. But when we enter the numbers in there, and this is, sorry, when we entered the number, so we're going to have a value between 1 to 10 in this column and a value between 1 to 10 in this column, right? And so for each of those, I pulled out, I think, the financial risk. So there are different factors, you're going to rate them, right? And then for each of the other product, oops, again, I don't know which button to press. So each of those, you know, each of the different risks has these different factors that go along with them that the operator is going to rate. But this is, I'll figure it out by the end of this presentation. So this is how it's going to show up. It's going to show up on this matrix. And notice that my degree of risk goes from 1 to 10. My preparedness goes from 1 to 10, right? So when I rate them in the Excel sheet, it shows up on my risk priority matrix in these different quadrants. So the factors with the highest degree of risk for which I am least prepared is obviously going to show up in the very high priority matrix. And when we think about operations with limited resources, time, financial resources, employees, and so on, you want to focus on the things that is going to have the biggest impact on your farm or your agritourism operation, which should be your very high priority risks, right? So this is a nice handy tool to help operators hone in on the things that they should be working on, right? So this is just an example. I put some hypothetical numbers in there for different factors. So here is what showed up in that very high priority listing. So things like tracking your key farm numbers, right? Which every business should be doing because that's how you should be making decisions. Are you doing that? Not. Maybe you should be, right? Because that's the only objective way to tell whether you're profitable or not. But anyway, whatever factors is here is not important because every farm, they're going to have a different set of factors showing up in the different quadrants, right? So as an ag service provider, I always recommend they deal with the very high priority, then the high priority, then the medium priority, right? So the low priority, see that they're very prepared to deal with it, and it has a very low degree of risk. There's no point in spending time or resources dealing with those things, okay? And again, how do you build out that plan? So identifying the risk, we don't stop there. We have to figure out how do we, so we were having that conversation over lunch today, right? How do you figure out, okay, now I know what I need to do. How do I do it? How do I get the money? What is the timeline for implementation? Who's gonna do it, right? So yeah, those are considerations, and this helps you build out that plan. So that's all in the tool as well. Okay, and I threw this up here, so we don't have time to go through what a partial budget is, but how do we evaluate which are the alternatives and which are the, so there might be, I don't know why they say this, but multiple ways to skin a cat. I don't know why people would want to skin a cat, but that's the saying, right? So multiple ways to get to the same objective, right? So which way do you choose, right? And so in our program, we really encourage people to use this wonderful tool that's I didn't develop this. This has been around for a long time. It's a partial budgeting tool, right? So that risk management tool really walks you through how to use a partial budget, right? But that's how you would figure out which is the best alternative given the benefits and given the cost of doing it, okay? And yeah, so that's the risk management toolkit. Again, it will take you, this QR code will take you to the West Virginia Agritourism Initiative where you could download it. It's a convoluted way, which is why I wanted to put it in Hover, because now you've got to sign up for, you've got to enter a username and password to get through. But once you do it, you can access it. Another tough day at the office for Dee. It's a tough job. But anyway, this is what you will expect to find in that tool, right? Everything included some risk management strategies and the partial budgeting template. And of course, my contact information if you need help. Yeah, and so that's that tool in a nutshell. Again, it's a wonderful way, depending on what perspective you choose to manage your business. That's a comprehensive tool that really integrates those different approaches to business planning and risk management from a are the lights going down on us? I mean, you know, what's going on, right? Okay. So here's an interesting comment, right, from some of the participants, which really speaks to the value of this, is that now they can actually see which are their important, the risks that they need to pay, attention to. And also the fact that they come up with this customized plan, because you can have a similar agritourism operation or a similar farm to your neighbor, but your risk, remember I said when you've seen one farm, you've seen one farm, because your risk could be so much different than your neighbors with a very, very similar operation. So that's my time, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you all have. And hooray for my models. That's thank you very much. Any questions? Yes, but you have to use the microphone.
I'm Montgomery from Romania.
Okay.
I'm a automatist engineer, and I'm looking every time at the look, at the things as a system. Your presentation was wonderful. It's just fitting my thoughts.
Okay.
So this approach is close to closed loop control system theory,
Yeah.
and it's very nice.
Okay.
What I like to ask you, because it's a lot of things to discuss about that, how to measure, how to get the information from output signals just to bring to the input to compare with the desire of the farmer, and how to provide the command, the order to the system to change in itself in order to adapt for getting the same output, because the risk affect the output.
Yes.
And the closed loop should help manager to make right decision to improve the content of the system
Right.
to get the same output.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you. Thanks for the question.
I really appreciate it. Maybe later we have some
Okay.
discussion.
Sure. Yeah.
But the question is how to measure, because to have the feedback by measurement of output, just to compare. Thank you.
Very good. And that's why the tool is called Reading the Agritourism Operation. Emphasis on the reading, because it all depends on farm records. You need to figure out, how do you get the inputs? How do you know where you're at? And what's happening is based on those records, right? And I know that one thing that I've discovered is that lack of record keeping is an international shortcoming. Yes, it is, right? But the only way we can get objective information, it's not what we think is happening. What's our soil health? What's our water quality? What's our profitability, right? What's our net worth? It only comes from your records. Okay, so the only way I think to feed information through that loop and to get that feedback is through your records. And that's the only way you're going to know if what you're implementing is working anyway, is through your records, right?
Using also to use field sensors. Real-time information.
For the biological issues, right? Yeah.
Of soil pollution, nitrogen, soil and forward, just to measure them and to get some information.
Definitely.
Not only writing is you are doing something distance.
Yes, I agree. Yes. Question in the back. Could you please use the mic? Thank you. Do we have any online? Hello.
Thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Bernard Chiwewa from Uganda. I have done a research on the challenges of aquaponics and aquaculture in Uganda. And exactly as you said, the problem of record keeping has been persistent. We do not have ways or tools to collect this information. And this is one of the shortcomings. If you want water quality, for example, you will need a university, maybe hydro controller or something to get that right pH of the soil or even the water. So there's no way a local farmer is going to contribute to that information. The best thing that where I used to work in a local farm, we used just a simple SWOT analysis. It would take us a full year, to assess maybe if the floods are coming or not, or if the effect of the water in the farm. But I would like to know, is there a simple tool that you can use for the local farms here, or where you have been working here in Virginia? Are there some simpler tools that you have practiced and they have really worked? The tools, especially for risk management, that have really worked, are they there so that they can borrow?
What element of risk management are we talking about? Because remember the tree with all of the different elements.
It has a lot of issues to look at. And as you know, agriculture and tourism, it becomes even wider.
Yeah.
But I would like to look at in the general concept of agrotourism, if there is something that is quite comprehensive that you've done, because this is really university research and it is quite complex for the usual farmer.
Well, so,
Kindly.
okay, thank you for the question. So This tool is used within the context of the West Virginia Agritourism Initiative, and I should have explained that, right? It is not a tool that we say, here's a tool, go use it. This is an entire 6 weeks training course that we do with our agritourism operators. So we take them through. This is how you uncover the risk. These are the strategies to manage the risk. And so this is the final sort of capstone activity. We've talked to you about all of these risks and ways to mitigate it and so on. So let's now do a farm assessment for you to figure out what are the things you need to be paying attention to. Okay, so it looks really overwhelming when you look at it, but the point is, like I was doing with Josh Bennett there, is to sit with them and say, okay, well, let's consider this. You're not making the decision for them, you're leaving it up to them, but you're holding their hand through the process. So it is not an overwhelming approach to dealing with that. Okay?
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes. You cut me off when you need to, Lindsay. I'll just keep answering questions. Okay.
Just when you're starting your business as an agritourism
Mhm.
operator, and you have a million things you got to do, plus you're also running a farm,
Yes.
so you don't sleep
That's
much.
right. Yes.
I agree with that question back there. Like, can you get these resources and how do you walk through it? But the other question is, in the degree of risk, how do you even begin? Farmers take a lot of risks.
Mhm.
We
Yes.
understand degree of
Yes.
risk.
Yes.
How do you measure that as a non-academic?
Right. So it's not necessarily about measuring it, but it's about thinking through what is the potential impact on my business, right? So if I, for example, when we visited that farm and you think about, you don't have a traceability plan to recall your products if something were to happen, what would be the magnitude of that risk is that you have to recall all of your products, right? And what would that mean for your business? So it's a very subjective way. It's not a way to measure it and say, oh, this risk has a 5, a degree of 5. It's not that exact of a science. It's all a very, very subjective thing for that individual operator. What impact do they think that risk is going to have on their business? Yeah? So it's not saying that all, lack of a traceability plan is always a 5 or 4. I could be doing things in really, really small batches. So if I had to recall my food product, is only going to be what I produce, let's say on a given day, for example. Right? So then if something were to happen with my products, there's some sort of an issue with my jams or my whatever product, then I only recall a small amount, let's say $10,000 worth rather than $100,000 worth. So again, it depends on the farm's situation, right? So it's not an exact science, it's very subjective, but it depends on, on the farmer themselves. And again, I just want to point out, you can come up for your question, but I just want to point out that we don't just give it to them and say, hey, go forth and conquer. We go through the training and then we hold their hand while using the tool, right?
Okay, I have a cheat question. It's very concrete. It's in your experiences with farmers considering agritourism, not prepared food, not thinking about HACCP things. Have you heard of any that you would have seen rated low input, but potentially higher income? Like, what would be the lowest risk places? And if you want to pass on that question, how have you helped people work through their farm insurance? I haven't seen anything concrete about how people are adding the new agritourism to their farm policies, or what policies do that easily.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, and again, remember the issue of when you've seen one farm, you've seen one farm, right? And so when you're adding an agritourism, either event or an enterprise, something that remains throughout the year, or maybe it's a one-day enterprise, right? One day event rather, that would dictate how that is added to your insurance policy. So you might either add, you know, something to your entire umbrella coverage that covers your farm, or you might just add what is called a rider to your insurance policy to cover a one-day event. Either way, whether you're adding it to your umbrella policy or as a rider, you should add it, right? So whatever you're doing on your agritourism operation, consult your insurance provider. That's important. And we were talking about low input, high reward, right? And so there are a number of things, and that's one of the things I encourage, you know, new beginning farmers to really consider is what are the resources that you have that are low hanging fruits, that are low risk, that would take low investment, but that you can reap some profitability. On-farm events, farm-to-table dinners, those kinds of things that doesn't really require you making a lot of changes, right? A lot of our farms have a lot of water features on the farm, right? So how can you incorporate that for the things that's growing in tourism, like wellness tourism, right? Backyard bird watching, for example, pollinated gardens, goat yoga, right? People outside of the US would be like, what? Goat yoga, right? But those are some wonderful opportunities that we see that, you know, in the world of tourism, those are a growing phenomenon that could be easily added to an agritourism enterprise as a low-hanging fruit to get people started coming to your farm. Yes? All right, thank you very much.